Hello, today we're going to talk about Guillotina configuration and just how to configure it and how configuration is loaded and how add-on applications are configured. Well, anyways, to get started, we will create a virtual environment and just calling it configuration. In this virtual environment, we'll install Guillotina and cookie cutter. Cookie cutter allows us to use Guillotina templates. And let's make this a little bit bigger. So we'll use Guillotina create template configuration to give us kind of a configuration file to start with. We'll leave it as config.py. And now if we look at config.py, we see that it has some defaults in here for us to look at. The important things to notice are the database configuration. The database name here maps to top level URL in Guillotina. Host and port are obvious. Password is important. If you have this zeroed out, then you can't do root password login. Auth extractors are pieces of configuration you won't often customize, but this is how we define credentials are extracted from requests that are coming in and how they're validated. And of course, CORS is really important for any API. You'll need to customize this to whatever hosts that you're doing. I mean, you can also do star, but that's kind of dangerous, but it depends on your API and if it's safe or not to do that. Also, JWT is really important. This needs to be customized for any logins on production machines in order for this to be secure. Also, make sure to take a look at the configuration sections in the documentation. We have docs for how you configure databases, and all the different options for a database, how you configure storages, that's dynamic databases, static files, and pretty much everything. But getting back to what we're working on for the purpose of this example, we're going to think about how each configuration affects how Guillotina runs. So we'll start with a database. We're just going to use a dummy database to start off with, and I just want to show how this affects how Guillotina runs. So we have Guillotina now running on port 8080. So let's go into and do DB. We're not authorized, so let's put the root username and password root. So now we see that that's working. It's mounted there. So it's really simple to change where our databases mount to, or mount additional ones, just like that. You can see now we have a DB2. That's how databases are configured and mounted. But also, let's go back here. Let me show you, that root login isn't permitted when you don't have a root password set. Just tried logging in with a root username and password and it failed. So let's put that back. Finally, let's install an add-on. Let's install Swagger support. Alright, Swagger's installed. So just, even though you've installed the application, you need to activate it with the configuration. So applications, Guillotina, Swagger. if we look, 8080 docs, you see Swagger's running. So what you need to know in terms of how configuration is loaded and the order that it's loaded in is, first, it's going to look through, it's going to use its base configuration that Guillotina runs with always. Then it's going to go through each add-on, in this case Swagger. So if we look at Swagger, we can just look at the Swagger add-on, go to init. It provides these application settings by default. So Guillotina starts with its base settings, and then it will load each application that you've defined its settings. And so in this case, it adds the static setting and the Swagger setting. And then it will apply your custom settings defined in your YAML or JSON file here. So the YAML or JSON file is always applied last, and application settings are defined before or applied before it. Let's go back to our Swagger configuration example. Swagger's defining Swagger underscore static directory in its configuration for a default configuration that the application is providing. We can customize that in our configuration to point it to the current directory. So we're just providing static entry in our YAML configuration. We're going to customize Swagger underscore static, and we're going to point it at this directory and see how it behaves in the browser. So we'll try loading Swagger again. So all those static resources for Swagger shouldn't load now. You see that? Because we customized that in our YAML file, even though this application provided a default setting for it. So if we go back and remove that setting, start it again, we're back to where we were and everything's working. I would also like to just go through some important settings. AIO HTTP client max size is a really important setting. This, if you have AIO HTTP is what Guillotina is based off of, and the base payload size for it is very small. I don't know it by offhand. It's like under a megabyte though. So if you have any payloads, say upload chunks that are 5 megabytes, they'll fail, and you won't know why necessarily, and you have to tweak this client max size. The JWK setting is required if you have multiple Guillotinas running at the same time and you need to use WebSockets. The JWK is for encrypting the temporary WebSocket token that's used for logging in a WebSocket. The loop policy setting is the configuration you need to use to, say, plug in UV loop to Guillotina. The store JSON setting is useful if you want to improve the performance of Guillotina and you don't need the JSON field in PostgreSQL. Conflict retry attempts, how many times to retry a request when there's a conflict. Default's 3, you might want to tweak that as well. Middleware is an important part. This allows you to hook in directly to AIO HTTP's middleware settings. Alright, that's everything I wanted to cover for this installment of Guillotina training, and thank you for listening.